today is that one form of sanctions has been exchanged for another. So you have got a form of sanctions that was being administered through executive orders. Executive orders are orders that are signed by the president. He doesn't need to go to Congress or Senate to get them approved. But ZIDERA is still in place. ZIDERA is not an executive order. It is a legislative piece which had to go to Congress and Senate and became law. To remove ZIDERA, you also need to go to the same houses of the American, the equivalent of Parliament, and have another law which will remove ZIDERA. For purposes of clarity, ZIDERA has never been used by the Americans. When you hear ZANU-PF guys making noise about ZIDERA, it's just propaganda. ZIDERA has never been used since it was enacted. What ZIDERA essentially does is to say America has got the right to veto loans from the World Bank and the IMF being given to Zimbabwe. It has a right to veto through ZIDERA, but that right has never been exercised. Why has it not been exercised? It's because Zimbabwe has never been in a position where it could borrow with sanctions or without sanctions. In fact, as far back as 1999, Zimbabwe was not able to borrow because of how the Robert Mugabe government was misusing money which it had borrowed from those institutions during the DRC war. And that money was not accounted for. It was spending about $1 million a day, but it was lying about how much it was spending. When Mugabe was asked to account for the money, he patiently left the Bretton institution, saying you can appeal, as he always did, like what he did with the Commonwealth, where he dragged us out instead of engaging them. So ZIDERA was never used. So when you hear people talk about ZIDERA, it's propaganda. Now, the set of sanctions that have been imposed today are actually very serious to the individuals that have been hit by them. The president of the country, the vice president of the country, the first lady of the country, and many other people, including Kudasha Gwire. And these sanctions are serious in a sense that they focus on corruption. They named the first lady as corrupt. That's a serious accusation. And they said she facilitates deals for her husband. Those are the allegations that were made by the Americans to justify the new set of sanctions. Anyone who is involved or has been named in these sanctions, again, is going to find it difficult to transact, not just in America. It says America, but it's across the world. It's the over-compliance aspect of it that ends up affecting individuals. That's the one point where I agree with Rutendo on the over-compliance. We see it even in GoFund. When you set a GoFund which has got Zimbabwe involved, it takes a long time to get your money out. It's the over-compliance. So we are yet to see how this is going to affect ordinary Zimbabweans. The names that have been put there belong to companies and individuals, but when banks are transacting with Zimbabweans, they over-comply because of poor, KYC. They make sure that you are nowhere near the scene of those people that have been named. So we are yet to see how this is going to affect ordinary Zimbabweans, if at all is going to affect ordinary Zimbabweans. But the tragedy of having a head of state sanctioned by the United States of America, first of all, it means America is saying, we don't really care about you. Because to sanction a head of state, it's a big deal. It means doing business with that head of state becomes next to impossible, not only for the United States of America, but for its allies, because it's very difficult, to go against your ally. And in terms of businesses, could us businesses have been sanctioned? But could us businesses do a lot of businesses, cross-border businesses with other businesses in the region, and all those businesses now have to be very careful about how they do things, because they too can be hit with sanctions if they are perceived to be aiding and abetting the businesses of the person that has been sanctioned, or the businesses themselves like Sakunda that has been sanctioned. It's really difficult to do business when your company has been sanctioned. I was talking to one former Zimbabwean minister who was on sanctions, who said to me, he was calling me by my totem. He said, Chirandu, unotaza kutenga kana bhanzi chairo pa-airport. Zita rako rikaita come up, uchishandisa a card or something like that. So when you see these people making noise, it's because of how it affects them. But in order to make it more effective in their arguments, they then drag everyone into it to say this is not just about you, this is about the whole country. But to have two individuals who sleep in the same house, sanctioned as has happened to President Mnangagwa and the First Lady, Auxilia Mnangagwa, it's a tragic thing to happen. And I think we're going to see a fallout because our leaders always respond using anger, and so we're going to see a fallout with the Americans and anyone who would be perceived to have pushed for this. That's how ZANU-PF always responds. In terms of the institutions, the president does business with local institutions. The president has got business interests. So those business interests are going to be affected as well, in as far as it concerns the president himself as an individual. If he's doing business with a bank, that bank, if it was moving money for the president from one country to another, it can't do so, because if it does so, it's in trouble with the OFAC regulations and with the Americans. And so big companies like Kuvimba Mining, Mutapa Fund, they're all in trouble. So I hope I saw Chennai on the panel, and I saw her drop. I hope she can come in and give a professional economics perspective to this thing, because it's important to explain it to ordinary citizens like myself in a way that people can understand how it will also affect them, if at all is going to, if it's going to affect them. So I think the takeaway is that Zedera remains. Zedera has never been used. Zedera allows America to block any loan, but it hasn't been done because Zimbabwe does not qualify for those loans. So the debt clearance process that was involving Dr. Adesina, who's the president of the African Development Bank, and former Mozambican president Chin'ono, was leading us to that goal where we could actually now borrow from the World Bank. So our failure to have access to World Bank money is not premised on sanctions. It's premised on the fact that we did not repay our loans when we borrowed the money, and we left those institutions in 1999 We are still with them. The World Bank has got an office in Zimbabwe. IMF has got an office in Zimbabwe. We actually get some money from IMF, which has nothing to do with loans. But in regards to loans, until we are able to service our debt, which is at about 22 billion US dollars, the international debt, we won't be able to borrow. So in as far as the data is concerned, having it or not having it is the same thing. Because even if it was not there, we still do not qualify to borrow. And if you don't qualify to borrow because you have not repaid your previous loans, it's not sanctions, it's just good banking practice. Thank you very much. And I hope, as I said, that Chennai will be able to give the economics perspective and how it's going to affect companies like Kulimba, because it's going to affect them, and how it's going to affect companies like Mtapa Fund, because all these people are intertwined in those companies. So I want to land by saying America is giving the ZANU-PF administration a middle finger, and it says we don't care about you. And America is tightened the sanctions regime by targeting companies and individuals that are actually key to its beef with Zimbabwe. The idea that sanctions have been loosened is preposterous. They've not been loosened, they've been tightened. The president is now there, the vice president is now there, Opam Chinguri is now there. So it's like the whole hierarchy is now being brought in into the sanctions regime. So you have a government whose top three have been sanctioned by the United States of America. It also has an effect on how they do business across the world. If you go to Mauritius as Emerson Mnangagwa or as Constantino Chiwenga, it's difficult for you to transact in Mauritius because most of the money in the world is cleared in New York. So that's why I've always argued that sanctions, they talk about America, your properties in America, but what they don't do is they don't tell you that it's going to affect you worldwide. If you are put on a sanctions list and you go to South Africa wanting to buy a house, you will not be able to buy that house. You will have to use another name of someone else or a company. So Emerson Mnangagwa cannot walk into South Africa and because that bank that does that transaction will be in trouble because of OFAC regulations. But as I said, a lot of these things are going to play out, and we're going to see as they play out how they're going to affect those individuals, how they're going to affect the running of the companies that have been named, and how they are going to affect companies and individuals that are linked to those individuals and to the companies that have been talked about. The last thing I'll say is that I want to explain why I said that America doesn't care about Zimbabwe at the present moment. America has not had an ambassador for over 2 years in Zimbabwe. Over 2 years, it hasn't had an ambassador since Ambassador Brian Nichols left. America has not had an ambassador. So it just shows you that we are so low on their radar in terms of our importance or lack of it. And people like Rutendo, I've heard what you read, Uncle Jed, that he has put out. I think he misunderstood what this was about. If his work is to fight sanctions, he actually needs to tighten his boots now because his work has been made much difficult than what it was before.
Right. Okay.